Today in our PSAT period, we're going to discuss the argument analysis. It's so important because it's a target for a lot of questions in the critical thinking reading passages. So we have to know and analyze the arguments in order to know what questions we're going to have in this part of the SAT exam. To reason analytically is to break down a thought, to break down a passage into its constituent parts. This is what we are trying to do. We are trying to analyze. I mean what by analyze? To break down the passage in its formal points into small pieces. So I can see the passage, I can see its parts, and I can answer the questions simply. So after we break down the small parts or the constituent parts of the passage, discover how those parts are related to one another, and thereby better understanding. When we reach this point, we can understand well the passage, the whole passage. So in this case, we can answer all the questions correctly. So this is our point, or this is our target for today. That process of argument analysis rests on the premise. It actually targets the premise that you are more familiar with. Well, this leads actually to better understanding. Just a minute. When we understand from the premise, from the beginning, when we understand our hypothesis, so we can understand the results, we can understand the passage till its end. Please, if you cannot understand, stop me and tell me I don't understand. Don't let it go like this. If you don't understand, just tell me. What I'm trying to tell you here is we have to analyze the text or the passage from its beginning, from its premise. When we understand this, so we can understand all the passage. When we reach this point, so we can answer any question targets this passage. For an analogy, we can again use the example in the chapter, the three-step method of dismantling an engine to better understanding or how it works. Once we have separated starter, the generator, the radiator, the pistons, etc. from the engine, it would be more enlightening if we knew how each of the parts functions and how they related to one another. Here, I'm trying to tell you something, which is we are dismantling, we are fixing the engine, so we are going to dismantle its parts. This is what we are going to do with our passages. We have to dismantle each part of it. We reach this point, so we understand well the passage. This is where premises and conclusions come in. Dismantling the passage into small pieces or constituents. Sorry. They are the parts of an argument. Conclusion and premise. They are main parts of the argument. Although the conclusion is often said to follow from premises, we will study conclusions first. because the first step in analyzing an argument is to identify its conclusion. Well, here actually it's not the ordinary essay. You're going to find the conclusion by the end of the essay. Here somehow it's different. I'll tell you how. In common jargon, an argument means a heated debate between two people. However, as used on the SAT, passage argument is a formal presentation of facts and opinions in order to support a position. As I told you that you don't have to wait until the last part of the essay in order to get the conclusion. Conclusions. In most cases, successfully analyzing an argument hinges on determining the conclusion of the argument. The conclusion is the main idea of the argument. Have you noticed this? Again, the conclusion is the main idea of the argument. It's what the writer is trying to persuade the reader to believe. This is the conclusion. Most often, the conclusion comes from the argument. The writer organizes the facts and his opinion so that they build up to the conclusion. Sometimes, however, the conclusion will come at the beginning of an argument. This is what I mean in here. Rarely does it come in the middle, and occasionally, for rhetorical effects, the conclusion is not even stated. Maybe you're not going to find the conclusion. 90% you can find it at the end, but seldom you can find it in the middle. And sometimes 10% can find the conclusion in the beginning. Examples. The police are the armed guardians of the social order. The blacks are the chief domestic victims of the American social order. A conflict of the interest exists, therefore, between the black and the police. So here, I've got some events, some details, and I've got the conclusion at the end. The police are the armed guardians of the social order. The blacks are the chief domestic victim of the American social order. So, a conclusion to this, a conflict of interest exists therefore between the black and the police. The underlined part at the end is the conclusion. I conclude what I have read in the first and second sentences, saying that a conflict of interest exists therefore between the blacks and the police. Here, the first two sentences anticipate, expects, or set up the conclusion. By changing the grammar slightly, the conclusion can be placed at the beginning of the argument and still sounds neutral. A conflict of interest exists between the blacks and the police because the police are the armed guardians of the social order and the blacks are the chief domestic victims of the American social order. What I have done in here is I got the last sentence, which is the conclusion, at the beginning. And I've changed something, which is I used because. So in here, there is no problem. It's the same in meaning. So the conclusion could be used as you see in the first sentence. We can find the conclusion by the end. In the second one, you're gonna find the conclusion at the beginning. And we've got no differences in meaning. The conclusion can also be forced into the middle. You can force the conclusion into the middle. But you seldom find this. It's the same sentence actually. The police are the armed guardians of the social order. So a conflict of the interest exists between the blacks and whites because the blacks are the chief domestic victim of American social order. So in here, my conclusion is in between, it's in the middle. It's generally awkward because we said that in most of cases you're going to find a conclusion by the end. Sometimes you're going to find it at the beginning, and seldom, or maybe you're not going to find it in between or in the middle. So when you find it in the middle, it's somehow awkward. Germ is the conclusion in the middle of the argument because it cannot be fully anticipated by what comes before, nor fully explained by what comes after. On the rare occasion, when a conclusion comes in the middle of an argument, most often either the material that comes before it or the material that comes after it is not essential. You understand? When determining the meaning of a conclusion, when you intend to understand the meaning of the conclusion, be careful not to read any more into it than what the author states. Don't get something from your mind. Stick to the writer's or the author's point of view. For example, many people will interpret the sentence, every Republican is not a conservative, to mean that some Republicans are not conservative. In SAT passages, it's typically taken from which is taken from academic journals, and the writers in those journals do not use grammar logically that loosely. On the SAT, the above sentence would mean what it literally states, that no Republican is a conservative. Again, guys, look at this sentence, please. Every Republican is not a conservative. Does it mean no Republican is conservative? Well, in SAT, yes. Exercises. Find and underline the conclusion to each of the following argument. If an argument does not state the conclusion, complete it with the most natural conclusion. Well, there is something before this. There is something before we discuss these exercises. Hello.
Mute, please.
Right. Well, the conclusion usually comes at the end of an argument. I'm concluding, saying that the conclusion usually comes at the end of the argument, sometimes at the beginning, but rarely in the middle. This is what I said in the last slide, the place where to find the conclusion. Writers use certain words to indicate that the conclusion is about to be stated. So, see these conclusion indicators. You always find these words or this vocabulary before the conclusion. These vocabulary are hence, so, thus, follows that, conclude that, as a result, therefore, accordingly, consequently, shows that, implies, means that. You're gonna always find these words before the conclusion. Well, see this example. All devout Muslims abstain from alcohol. Steve is a devout Muslim, thus, he abstained from alcohol. Actually, in this example, thus anticipates the conclusion that necessarily follows from the first two sentences. Notice the different function of thus in the following sentences. The first one, the problem is simple when the solution is thus stated. In this example, thus means in that manner. So it's not for conclusion here. So please try to focus while reading the conclusion indicators. Okay. Most often, the conclusion of an argument is put in the form of a statement. Sometimes, however, the conclusion is given as a command or obligation. I'm gonna give you an example. When you get the example, you're gonna understand. All things considered, you ought to vote. Here, the author implies that you're obliged to vote. Again, all things considered, you ought to vote. So here, you have to vote. Another example, son, unless you go to college, you not make you will not make a success of yourself. No carnage has ever been failure, so you will go to college. Here the conclusion is giving as an imperative command. The conclusion actually can be even be put in front of a question. This rhetorical technique is quite effective in convincing people that a certain position is correct. You- We are more likely to believe something if we feel that we concluded it on our own, or at least if we feel that we were not told to believe it. A conclusion put in question form can have this result. Well, I know that it's boring somehow when I'm explaining, because you don't interact. So it's time for you to interact because we have some questions. I'm gonna ask you the question, you're going to answer. And this is the best part of our period when you interact. Well, my question is find and underline the conclusion to each of the following arguments. If an argument does not state the conclusion, complete it with the most natural conclusion. Question number one. When a man is tired of London, he's tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford. So in here, where is the conclusion? Is it when a man is tired of London, or he's tired of life, or for there is in London all that life can afford? Which one, guys, is the conclusion? Okay, somehow I'll help you. We said that we seldom get the conclusion in between or in the middle. So forget about he is tired of life. So we still have when a man is tired of London and for there is in London all that life can afford. Which one of these sentences could be our conclusion? Hello? You there,
Yeah,
guys?
Mister.
Yes, good.
Yes, mister, we're here.
Yes, tell me. Which sentence is the conclusion? Guys, again, the conclusion is the main idea of the argument. The main idea of the argument. In here, where is the main idea? It's when a man is tired of London, or for there is in London all that life can afford. It's the first one. When the man is tired of London, this is the conclusion. Here it comes at the beginning. No problem. Question number two. Either God controls all of man's behavior or God does not control any of the man's behavior. God must not control man's behavior since there is so much evil in the world. Where is the central idea in here? Is it either God controls all of the man's behavior, or the second sentence, God does not control any of man's behavior, or the third one, God must not control man's behavior since there's so much evil in the world. Where is the conclusion here? Guys, you are sleeping today. You don't want to interact. In the last period, you didn't write down the character sketch. Now you don't want to answer me. Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Where is the conclusion here, guys? Is it either God controls all of man's behavior, or God does not control any of man's behavior, or God must not control man's behavior since there's so much evil in the world?
The last thing you said.
Yes.
آخر واحدة.
Well, this time actually, I've got a tricky question for you because I told you before that we seldom get we seldom get just a minute, guys. Okay, once again, I told you that we seldom got the conclusion in between, in the middle of the sentence, because it's supposed to be at the end or at the beginning. But actually, when I see conclusion here, I found it in between. I found it.
Your voice is
Yes,
lagging.
it's in here. God does not control any of man's behavior. Okay. Next sentence. Most people would agree that it's immoral to lie. But if a kidnapper accosts you on the street and asks you which way his escaped victim went, would it be immoral to point in the opposite direction? So in here, excuse me, in, how many sentences do you have in here? The first one, most people would agree that it's immoral to lie. Second one, but if a kidnapper accosts you in the street and asks you which way his escaped victim went, and the third one, would it be immoral to point in the opposite direction? Which one holds the conclusion? Well, actually, this sentence is also tricky because if you are going to search for conclusion, you're not gonna find any conclusions. So in here, no conclusion is stated. But the author implies that to lie is not always immoral. Prophet Ibrahim actually lied someday, saying that this is the one uh, who destroyed the other stages. So it's not always immoral to lie. But I don't think this is a conclusion. It's not obvious that we've got a conclusion in this sentence. Number four, beware from I'm fearless and therefore powerful. So where's the conclusion here? If you are going to give back to what I told you before, that you're going to find some words always precedes the
There.
conclusion. Yes. So we've got the word therefore. So simply
Therefore,
the word, yes, the word that follows therefore is the conclusion. Beware
powerful.
for this and therefore yes, powerful. So powerful in here is the conclusion.
Mm.
The more deeply I understand the central role of caring in my own life, the more I realize it to be central to the human condition.
What's the question, Mr. Hill?
The question again. The more deeply I understand the central role of caring in my own life, the more I realize it to be central to the human condition. So I've got two sentences in here. That one is before the comma and the other one is after the comma. So which one of these sentences holds the central idea? I mean, the conclusion.
The one after the
That's right.
the first one, Mister.
No, it's it to be central to the human
The
condition.
second one before the comma. Sorry.
The second one after the comma. Yes. The more I realize it to be central to the human condition. It's the conclusion, what I concluded. I've got a premise and conclusion. The premise, which something introductory comes at the beginning, and the conclusion, which is the central idea that is always the result of something. So the premise at the beginning and the conclusion after this. It's supposed to be so, but sometimes we get the conclusion at the beginning of our speech. And here is the problem. Here we sometimes muddle up because I've told you that the conclusion is 90% comes at the end. Sometimes at the beginning and rarely in the middle. So in here, I realized it to be central to the human condition is the conclusion. Well, the last sentence in here is the continuous stream of violent death depicts on television has so jaded society that murder is no longer shocking. It's hardly surprising then that violent crime so permeates modern society. So, what do you think? Where's the conclusion here?
I actually don't know. So. Where are the other students? What must answer, Mister?
Yes, I'm just waiting for somebody to answer me.
I don't know the answer, but the other student must answer.
Yeah, Mister, I answered the question before it. Choose another student.
Certainly, it's supposed to happen. Well, actually, the implied conclusion is that violence depicted on television contributes to society's high rate of violence. Okay? So, guys, I want you to watch this picture, this please. Once again, guys, it's this diagram. It's so important when you understand this. So, it's so easy to know the conclusion. It's so easy to know the premises. Well, in reading section, you've got 52 questions. You have to answer them in 65 minutes. You are going to leave 10 minutes by the end of this section in order to transfer your answers into the bubble sheet. Okay? You're not going to answer in the same paper. The SAT exam actually is not internet-based tests. No. You may have ACT if you'd like to have internet-based test, but SAT is not internet-based test. It's a paper-based test. So you have to leave sometime 10 minutes. It's advised to do this. Leave 10 minutes by the end of this section in order to transfer your answers into the bubble sheet. Okay? You understand, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Mister,
So
like we have homework.
yeah, certainly. But first of all, I have to discuss this diagram in I guess in 1 minute. We still have just 1 minute. Drop down 10 minutes of 65 minutes, so you've got what? 55 minutes. And they are 52 questions. So the question must not take more than 1 minute. Okay? And your questions are going to be inside this outline. Your outline, you're going to be asked about the author's message. When you are reading the critical thinking passages and you find in here an author's message, so you've got to know that here we've got a question. So you're going to circle this part, this sentence, or this part of the essay, sorry, of the passage. Well, because you're going to have a question on the main idea, another question for textual evidence, another one for a summary of the text you've read. So you have to know the total idea or the central idea, relationship between parts of the text, in qualitative information, which relates to the quality um, in the passage. In something else you're going to be asking for, which is the author's craft. You're going to be asked about the purpose, in which the author wrote down his passage. You're going to be asking about his point of view and argument, which we discussed today, the structure in the diction. Okay, guys, that's all for today. Uh, See you next Sunday, inshallah. And please don't forget to answer
Mister,
the
there is a
assignment
quiz or
today.
not?
Yes, yeah, next Sunday, inshallah, you're going to sit for a quiz. You got to
Mister,
know
we have
this.
a math quiz on Sunday.
Math,
Yes.
well, just a minute. I'll check. Just a minute.
Mister,
Here we go.
your accent
Yes.
is beautiful.
It's what?
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, here
It's
is
like British, yes.
somehow. Well, guys, in here, next Saturday is going to be your quiz. Next Saturday, not Sunday. On Saturday, you've got English, social, and study history and geography. For English quiz are gonna be it's gonna be at 1:30 for 30 minutes. In the social studies quiz is gonna be in the same day at 2 p.m. 2:30. It's gonna be your study history quiz. Any question? Any other question, guys?
No, it's clear. Thanks.
No.
What's-
Mister, can you send this schedule on the classroom?
Yes, I will. Don't worry. And the school will send it today, inshallah. It's just to fill in the scoop, which is the pages covered in the exam, and we're gonna be sent. It's gonna be
This is the
sent on class.
quiz, right?
Excuse me.
This is the quiz.
Hello. Yes, it's about next week quiz. It's gonna be next Saturday. Don't forget. Don't say it's on Sunday because Saturday is a day off. It's weekend. It's the weekend. No, it's not. It's not this. You're going to sit for the exam at 1:30 p.m. See you guys. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام.
See you.
إن شاء الله.